Wendy Capewell, an experienced counsellor and psychotherapist. I work with so many people who feel that they're the only ones struggling with the issues that they share with me. Possibly, like many of you, they feel so alone. And so the aim of this podcast is to talk to guests who have their own stories to share, their experience of the struggles that they've been through, or maybe they're continuing to live with, offering their insights as well as their inspiring journey. So let me introduce my guest.
Well, I've got a lovely guest today, Piers Cross. I've met him several times before, and I follow him on YouTube, and LinkedIn. And he kindly interviewed me on his podcast. But as I said to him, and I've said it several times, there is a real gentleness and a calmness surrounding him, which is just delightful. So Piers is an author, a men's coach, and a podcast host. So welcome, Piers, and please tell us more about you.
Thank you, Wendy. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate your warmth and your kindness. So thank you. Introduce myself. So essentially, I went to boarding school, age 11 through to 18. On the surface, it seemed like it was, I'd really thrived there. I was very good at sports, captain athletics, and I went on to business school. It was a European business school in France, Paris, London. And, I ended up graduating, going working in the city of London in financial sales and banking. And then in 2000, I had a breakdown. And within a few months, my father had contracted terminal cancer. I'd split up with my partner. I'd left my job, and essentially I was homeless for a period of a few months, just sleeping on people's sofas. And I started to, basically I fell apart. And for a few years, I went from, I went to Africa thinking maybe if I went and helped others, but actually there was this deep self-hatred, really, and I got into addictions. It was very messy, and eventually arrived in a Buddhist monastery. So 2002. And it was around that time that I came across the work of Nick Duffel, and the making of them, in particular, the book. And I suddenly realized, oh my God, this is me. The reason I've been struggling mentally, and I was self-harming, tried to commit suicide, a lot of it was to do with boarding school.
Wow. And you hadn't made the connection prior to that?
No. And it's interesting. I spoke with Nick Duffel. I interviewed him for my documentary in September. And he said, how old were you when you came across this work? And I said, I was 26. And he says, wow, that's really young. He says, most people come across this work and the understanding of the impact of boarding school when they're in their 40s and 50s. And I was blessed because I was in a Buddhist monastery. One of the monks who I spoke with, I think on Monday, he had also been at boarding school, and he'd finished reading this book. And the synchronicities were amazing. That day, I'd been in a therapy session in the local town, and the therapist said, you really need to read this book called The Making of Them by Nick Duffel. Got back to the monastery, and in front of my door was a book. I turned it towards me. I'm like, my mouth dropped open. It's like The Making of Them.
Wow.
And this monk had finished reading it. Said, I think Piers should read this. He went to boarding school. And so that's how I came across it, was that, and the synchronicity was like, so was 21 years ago.
Yeah.
And
because the problem is that whatever we've experienced, for us it was normal. Why would we question it? Well, I work with, as you know, I work with all kinds of people who've suffered different kinds of traumas. And for them, they said, well, yes, I had my childhood was fine. I had a happy childhood. And then I start kind of digging gently. And then I discover, well, it wasn't happy. You believed it was normal. You believed it was happy because that's all you knew. You had nothing else to measure it against.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that's the thing with boarding school in this country is it's normalized.
Yeah.
And your work with attachment.
Mm.
So realize that, at age 8, age 11, you break that attachment with not only your parents, you're breaking the attachment with your home, with your room, with your toys, with your pets, with your home friends, and then it's normalized. Oh, it's a good thing for you. Yes, there are very good aspects of boarding school, the education, the sport,
Mm-hmm.
but there are shadow sides to that.
Yeah.
For me, what I see is a common thread for ex-boarders is they struggle to stop. They're always working because that's what we learned at school. Nick Duffel calls it the timetabling. The other is we really struggle to feel any emotions.
Yeah.
We're taught very early on that if you cry, if you get angry, if you show too much excitement, you are laughed at. And because there's no privacy, you learn to build up a wall.
Yeah.
Or
Protect yourself.
exactly. And then the third thing, there's obviously many more, but third thing is we really struggle in intimate relationships.
You couldn't allow yourself to be vulnerable.
Exactly. And that's a key part of being in a relationship is to be vulnerable, saying, I'm hurt. Oh, I want to cry. And for me, I couldn't connect to my emotion till I had my breakdown. Then, boom, all the tears came.
And I picked up on when you said that you removed from all those things that you knew. What you were actually there's real abandonment. Your parents abandoned you, or if even not intentionally, but you would have felt that abandonment.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked earlier, and you said betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
All the losses that you experienced, the loss of your pets, the loss of that connection with friends, that loss of your home, all of those losses would have been huge,
Mm-hmm.
not acknowledged.
Yeah, not acknowledged. And I think, I was speaking to a psychiatrist on my podcast, not from the UK, and she said, well, after a week you can go home. But I think, again, that's the normalization is actually, and I spoke to someone a couple of days ago, is that you don't have any friends at home because one, you're only there 3 months of the year, you're away 9 months of the year. So Joy Shavrin says in her book, The Boarding School Syndrome, she says children are effectively homeless, no longer fully belonging at home nor at school. We live in this, we're one person at home. My name at home is Piers. I got to boarding school, I called myself Simon, and then the name became Ziggy. And there's another guy who did that. He went to boarding school. He was called Alex. When he went, he was called Alexander. Then he became Alex, and then he became known as Boris.
Wow. So you almost took on a different persona.
Yeah, I did. Became Ziggy, and it was like, cold, angry, keep people away from me, no one mess with me. And then there was the Piers, who were soft, creative. And obviously, when I left boarding school, the Piers, I changed my name from Simon back to Piers, but the Simon, that hard rock that I presented to the world carried on.
Yeah. And from my point of view, understandably, you need to keep that mask on.
Mm-hmm.
You needed that protection. You needed that wall, that whatever it was, that armor, to be able to deal with what you were dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just stop and ask you for a moment, what was it like going home? How did you feel going home when, between terms?
Yeah, so I think the first day is like, oh, it's lovely to get out of that place, to go home. And it was like, my comics had piled up.
Really?
It's like, oh, I could read my comics and I can watch TV, you know, things like that, or have proper food. But within a day or two, I was bored because
Bored?
I got no friends there. I used to just hide in the house, and I would go out with the dog once a day, and I'd go and play football, or in the local park. But generally, within a day or two, it was like I would get bored because there was nothing to do, and that's the thing about why we struggle with overworking, and we can't stop, is that there's always something to do at the school. You're always on a timetable, so suddenly you get home and it's boring. You can't wait to get back to school on one level. That's why you're homeless. You don't really fit in at home, and you don't really fit in at school.
No. What kind of reception did you get from your family?
When I came home,
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting one. So my father was an ex-boarder.
Yeah.
He was a very angry man, but he seemed to, as my sister said, he used to be on his best behavior. He wouldn't shout as much. He wouldn't get as angry. He was kind of, so I think, I don't know if necessarily they understood me, my family, because they'd ask me something. I say, it's all right. I'd show no emotion. And they were like, no, can't you get excited by anything? I'm like, no, I can't. And so generally, they just left me to it. Mum would go off to work. My dad was at work. So I would just be at home. My sister was off most of the time at school because we had longer, holiday times. But yeah.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what's coming up for me is the sense of it being an intruder.
Yeah. 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 I think that's it. It's like, and I've heard this from other clients as well, this idea that you go away, and it was always seen I was the lucky one
Oh,
because you're going away and having this great education. And because my father wasn't very easy, it was like it was seen as you're very lucky. But actually what I was going through was not lucky. What was
no.
happening, the lack of privacy and the challenge. But it was very difficult, as Joy Shavrin and again says, is for us to put into words exactly what we're feeling.
Yeah, you were in survival mode in lots of ways.
Mm, mm,
Lots of
mm,
ways. And there's something much darker that happened to you. And
mm,
many of those boys who were sent away,
mm, mm.
you were abused.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was abused. There was, and I think it's that normalization of abuse
Mm,
that it's you didn't speak up, so therefore I'd come home, I wouldn't tell what was going on. But it was this normalization that it was like a homoerotic environment that, for example, nobody was allowed to be gay in the pupils. Yet that was the ultimate insult. So I was there 7 years. Not one person came out as being gay. Now I know there's quite a lot who are gay, but it was so dangerous to be called gay. And personally, I thought from age 12 that I was gay.
wow.
But, all it was for me was that there was no warmth. I just wanted touch. As again, Joy Shavrin says, she says that, the lack of appropriate physical contact is for long periods of time, a serious deprivation. It's a skin hunger. So what I was wanting is warmth, the love I used to get from mum and cuddles. And so that's what I wanted. It was coming out the other side. So that was the environment we were in. But at the same time, we had a sense that quite a lot of our teachers were gay. And there was this unwritten rule, backs to the walls, don't bend over. The teachers might, try and bugger you. So we were around that environment. So we kind of had the stories quite a lot that this teacher's, abusing people. But it was a joke. But it turns out many years later that wasn't jokes. Quite a few of the teachers are in prison now.
And what is frightening, it's such a heinous crime. But what's frightening is that sex offenders will find those in places such as teaching or clubs or places where children are prey, they're ready prey almost, which is horrendous.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, and my wife said this and others have said this, is this idea that it was you were captive. Is Joyce Chabran, A, B, C, D of boarding school syndrome. The C is captive. You can't escape. You're in the middle of nowhere. You can't just go to the town and just get away. So you're captive there, and then you can't speak up. So if anything does happen to you, well, you can't tell anyone because no one, grasses are seen as one of the, along with being gay, is a terrible thing. So, then if you have pedophiles, and a lot of these schools, as I spoke to a head teacher on my podcast, and he was saying that they always put the institutions first above the pupils. It needs to be the other way around, that it's the well-being of the pupils which come first, and second is the institution. But if you have the institution first, well, you're not going to find out about abuse. You're not going to speak up about it.
And there's so much at risk. You just talked about not grassing. That would be awful. Seen as really bad. You just didn't do it. But there's so many other things attached to abuse. I mean, when I work with individuals, there's not being believed. That's a big one. You have no power. As children, we have no power. We can't survive on our own. So there's that fear of being physically, let alone emotionally, abandoned. And then the other people that could be affected. You can't, if it's in families, which I work a lot with, it's, well, if I tell, what will happen to mum? What will happen to my brother? What will happen to the other family members? There are all those other things. So when people say you should speak up, they're not in that child's world at all. They haven't stepped into their shoes for 1 second to see how absolutely terrifying it would be to speak up.
Yeah. And I think, and I think for me, this is something, as I do more podcasts, and I was interviewed last year by the Sunday Telegraph, or maybe it was the Times, and I get quite nervous speaking because I learned from a young age not to speak up.
Yeah.
There's something wrong with speaking up, and I can feel that now, a bit of nervousness. And yeah, I think for us as ex-boarders, and I think the work of Jennifer Freyd, if your listeners, please read some of her books. She said, and this comes from Dr. Annabelle Gonzalez, a psychiatrist. In her book, she says, Jennifer Freyd proposed the idea that betrayal is the key element that makes an experience become traumatic, especially in childhood. Nick Duffel then says, betrayal is the great, unrecognized but cherished blood sports of British boarding life. First, you get betrayed by your parents, dumped away in an institution for what are meant to be the best years of your life. Then you get betrayed by the boarder's double bind, which goes like this. It says, if they love me, my parents, why do they send me away? And if it's so important to them and I don't like it, there must be something wrong with me. And that's what I see a lot with our politicians and our leaders who've been to boarding school, is the deep core, deep down inside, is I'm not good enough. I'm unlovable. And it comes from this betrayal.
Yeah. And let's not forget the shame, because
Mm.
if we've been betrayed, there is a shame. It must be my fault. It must be me. And we carry other people's shame. We know, well, as we get older, we do the work, we know that the shame belongs to them. But as the children carry the shame because they believe it's their fault. What did I do to deserve this, etc.?
Mm. Yeah, yeah, the shame. And, for me, my survival was self-hatred. I thought, I used to call myself a piece of shit. If I felt emotion, the inner critic would come on, you effing piece of shit, I'd really beat myself up. So I didn't express emotion. So it was like squashing it down. So
Yeah.
there was that shame, that self-hatred. And yeah, and that's why when I started to have my breakdown, started to self-harm, it was like that angry, you little shit,
Yeah.
beating me physically up. And yeah.
And I'm so sorry that you went through that. And I do understand how difficult it is to talk about it. I've tried to walk around it gently because
Mm,
it's so emotive
mm,
and so distressing. But I want to thank you for sharing the things you have, because you
mm,
you have got so many more insights now. And what I really admire about you is that you are helping other men.
mm,
And men, I really feel for men. They struggle. They really struggle to be able to speak up at the best of times.
mm,
And yeah, I understand women don't have equality and all of those things, but I do feel for men. They seem to get left behind such a lot in so many ways. So I really thank you for being that advocate for men and their mental health and so on, because it's so important.
mm,
So
mm. Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate that, Wendy. I think, yeah, I don't find it easy speaking up, and yet I see the importance of it, that actually that's one of the keys for our healing as men
yeah,
and as ex-boarders, is to speak up and go, this is what happened to me.
yeah,
You know, my school was rife with sexual abuse. 6 of my actual teachers are in prison now, and there's lots more who haven't come forth. While I was there, one of my friends, the one guy I was speaking to, he committed suicide.
mm,
And that devastated me, but it also devastated a lot of the children at that school. I've often heard people who went there, it's like it still impacts me now. Um, you know, and I think we need to start speaking up and go, the more I look at the research of Jennifer Freyd, of Nick Duffel, Joy Shavrin, neglect, and NSPCC, it's like, this is a trauma. And we're normalizing it, saying it's good. And it's like, it's not. Even now, it hasn't changed enough. Yes, there's not the sexual abuse from the teachers, but it's still going on peer in these schools, because there's not the as one of the head teachers says, there's not enough people to keep an eye. There's too much paperwork now. That's what the teachers are spending a lot of their time doing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And sadly to say, sexual abuse is not an acceptable kind of discussion to have. I remember 18 years, well, yes, 18 years ago, I was a volunteer counsellor in rape and sexual abuse centre. And if I ever told anybody, first of all, I'm going to admit it, I was embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
That was my initial thing. And then when I started speaking out about it, people would really physically move away. They really didn't want to discuss this at all. It's getting better, but nowhere near. In nearly 20 years, really, we haven't improved on this. We're not
Mm-hmm.
owning it. We're not speaking up. We're not talking enough about it. It's just one of those things that we don't want to own up to. It's
Mm-hmm.
horrendous. I mean, any kind of abuse to a child is horrendous, but that one is a real heinous crime. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel this comes back to the documentary we're starting to make, is, charting my own boarding school experience, but also going, how many of our leaders went to boarding school? Oh, actually, 63% of High Court judges, the head of the BBC, head of Channel 4, oh, the head of the Sun newspaper. These are all ex-boarders, the head of the Daily Mail, the owners. You realize, oh, wow, 75% of Liz Truss's government, you know, uh, all of these people, and you're like, they're not understanding that it was normalized sexual abuse in these places.
Yeah.
And therefore, is that why? Question, is that why we might be normalizing it now and struggling to look at it? Because it's actually a huge shadow within our psyches as, as a British, but also globally.
Yeah. I think we need to both take a deep breath here and center ourselves, because this has been a very heavy subject and it's got deeper as we've gone into the podcast. And maybe our listeners need to take a deep breath as well and center themselves and maybe put their feet firmly on the ground and really get back in touch with the here and now, because I think this has been quite a traumatic kind of discussion.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, ground, and I find nature's been so healing for me.
Yes.
Outside, and my wife as well has been a tremendous help, helping me to go from avoidant attachment, which is, I feel, is what boarding school creates, avoidant attachment, attached people, to becoming securely attached, to trusting, to feeling safe.
Yeah.
Go, I can cry. She's not going to run away.
I'm so glad you have that special person in your life. I'm so happy for you. That's so important. Yeah. And to be in touch with nature. I think there's something very special about nature. I feel that way too. Whenever I'm, even between clients, I will go and walk in nature. To kind of the beauty of this planet. It's just something very special.
Yeah.
So, Piers, what is one thing you want to put out to the people who are listening? What is it you'd like them to take away?
I think one of the things I learnt in monastery was, to really be kind. That if we have been through trauma, we can be very hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think it's that, be kind to yourself. Take a warm bath, go to bed early, go for a walk, hand on your heart, just appreciate that being under the hand.
Yeah, kind and compassionate. I think that's really important for all of us. Yeah.
So that's one thing I'd say, just be gentle with yourself. See that little child inside of you that just needs your love, your attention, and your warm presence.
Yeah. That's a lovely thought to go away with. What's one easy way that people can get in touch with your peers? I'll put all the details in the show notes, but one easy way.
Yeah, so piers-cross.com is my website. Please do, go there. I have just setting it up, like an hour's free training people can go on about overwhelm, burnout. So people can access that. It's not available yet, but maybe by the time it goes live, it will be. And I have a podcast on the website, which you can listen to Wendy speak about childhood trauma and relationships. So.
Okay, thank you so much, Piers. It's been an absolute delight talking to you today, and thank you for your vulnerability and your wisdom. Thank you.
My blessings. Thank you.
I hope you found this episode interesting as well as helpful. Do get in touch if you would like to learn more about working with me. My email address is info@wendycapewell.co.uk. Take good care of yourself. Until next time.